2026 is not an ordinary year. It is a moment where time doesn't just pass, it speaks. In every generation, there are certain years that are not remembered as numbers, but as turning points. And 2026 is one of those years. What you've been feeling lately, the restlessness, the pressure, the confusion mixed with a strange sense of hope, is not an accident. It is a signal of divine timing. When God is about to take someone higher, the first thing he does is disrupt their comfort. You stop being satisfied with what once felt enough. What used to be your dream no longer fulfills you. Many people mislabel this feeling as boredom, lack of motivation, or even depression, when in reality it is a calling knocking on the door of their spirit. Divine timing does not mean everything suddenly becomes perfect. It means you are prepared even when you don't feel ready. God does not move according to the clock. He moves according to character. When he sees that you have grown on the inside, when you have survived pain, endured rejection, waited through delays, and stayed faithful through silence, he shifts the season. That is what 2026 represents. The years you thought were wasted were actually years of development. The doors that seemed closed were not denying you. They were aligning you. The silence was not absence. It was preparation. Divine timing always comes with pressure because purpose is never revealed in comfort. If life feels uncomfortable right now, if decisions feel heavy, if people no longer understand you, there is a strong chance you are exactly where you are supposed to be. When a calling activates, instability shows up first. Old systems stop working. Old identities begin to crack. Old routines lose their effectiveness. This is where most people panic. They assume something is wrong and run back to familiar ground. But the real test of divine timing is whether you can tolerate the discomfort of transition without retreating to what is safe. 2026 is significant because it will be a year of visibility for those who are spiritually and mentally awake. Others will see the same year they always see, the same problems, the same excuses, the same cycles. But for those who recognize the moment, acceleration will follow. Connections will begin to form naturally. Ideas will become clearer. Doors that have been closed for years will open without force. Not because you suddenly became extraordinary, but because you became aligned. Alignment is always more powerful than effort. One of the hardest truths about divine timing is that it does not ask for permission. When the moment arrives, the call comes whether you feel ready or not. And if you ignore that call, time does not pause. It moves forward without you. That is why the quiet voice inside you saying, "There has to be more. I was made for something greater. My life cannot be limited to this level," should not be silenced. That voice is not imagination. It is an invitation. 2026 will pressure you to let go of excuses, to stop underestimating your capacity, and to see yourself not just as a survivor, but as a carrier of purpose. You were not created merely to get by. You were sent. And when someone is sent, time itself begins to cooperate with the assignment. So if you feel an internal push, a holy dissatisfaction, a sense that staying where you are is becoming impossible, understand this clearly. It is not random. It is divine timing. And divine timing is never late. God never calls people to stay comfortable. Comfort is attractive, but it is also dangerous because it quietly convinces you that where you are is good enough. A calling, on the other hand, is disruptive by nature. It interrupts routines, challenges assumptions, and demands growth. That is why so many people struggle to recognize their calling, because it doesn't feel safe, it doesn't feel convenient, it doesn't feel logical. A calling stretches you beyond what you already know how to do, and that stretching is uncomfortable. But comfort has never produced transformation. It only preserves what already exists. Most people don't fail because they lack potential. They fail because they fall in love with familiarity. The comfort zone is not always a place of pleasure. Sometimes it is simply a place of predictability. You know what to expect there. You know how much effort it takes. You know how much disappointment it can bring. And strangely, that feels safer than the unknown. A calling pulls you away from what you can control and pushes you toward what requires faith. That is why the comfort zone and the calling are always in conflict with each other. One says, "Stay where you are." The other says, "There is more." When God calls you higher, he is not trying to take something from you. He is trying to take you somewhere. But the first thing you notice is not excitement, it is resistance. Your mind starts listing reasons why now is not the right time. You tell yourself you need more resources, more confidence, more approval, more certainty. Comfort speaks in excuses that sound responsible. Calling speaks in invitations that sound risky. And the danger is that comfort often disguises itself as wisdom, while calling can feel reckless if you don't understand its source. The comfort zone promises peace, but it delivers stagnation. It tells you that avoiding discomfort is the same as protecting yourself, when in reality, it is limiting you. Growth always demands discomfort. Muscles grow under tension. Character grows under pressure. Vision grows when you step into spaces that intimidate you. A calling will ask you to do things that expose your weaknesses, not to shame you, but to strengthen you. Comfort hides weaknesses. Calling heals them by forcing you to confront them. There is a reason why the call always feels bigger than you. If it felt manageable, you wouldn't need faith. If it fit neatly into your current life, it wouldn't change you. A calling requires you to become someone new, and becoming someone new always means leaving something old behind. Old habits, old thinking, old identities. Comfort says, you can keep all of that. Calling says, you can't carry this where you're going. That is why obedience feels costly before it feels rewarding. Many people pray for elevation but negotiate with the process. They want higher results with lower sacrifice. They want purpose without pressure, impact without inconvenience. But calling does not negotiate with comfort. It confronts it. It asks hard questions. Are you willing to be misunderstood? Are you willing to be uncomfortable? Are you willing to fail while learning? Comfort will always answer no. Calling requires a yes, even when your voice shakes. The tragedy is that some people spend their entire lives managing discomfort instead of pursuing purpose. They adjust their dreams to fit their comfort instead of adjusting their comfort to fit their dreams. Over time, the calling grows quieter, not because it disappears, but because it is repeatedly ignored, and comfort slowly turns into frustration. What once felt safe begins to feel empty. What once felt stable begins to feel suffocating. That is often the moment people realize that comfort is not neutral, it is costly. Calling is not about leaving everything overnight. It is about choosing growth daily. Every step away from comfort is a step toward clarity. Every decision that prioritizes purpose over ease sharpens your direction. God does not call the qualified, He qualifies the called. But qualification only happens outside the comfort zone. That is where dependency is built. That is where courage is developed. That is where transformation takes place. So if you feel a tension between where you are and where you know you should be, that tension is not a problem. It is proof. Proof that you were not designed to stay comfortable. Proof that there is more in you than your current environment requires. The question is not whether you have a calling. The real question is whether you are willing to let go of comfort long enough to answer it. Every time God elevates a person, He also increases their responsibility. Higher levels are never just about greater visibility, greater influence, or greater reward. They are about greater weight. Many people ask for elevation without understanding what comes with it. They want the platform, but not the pressure. They want the results, but not the responsibility. But in the kingdom, promotion is not a gift you receive. It is a trust you are given, and trust always comes with accountability. At lower levels, mistakes are private. At higher levels, mistakes are public. At lower levels, your decisions affect you. At higher levels, your decisions affect others. That is why elevation requires maturity before it brings opportunity. God does not lift people just because they are talented. He lifts them because they are dependable. Talent can open a door, but character determines how long you stay in the room. When God calls you higher, He is not just asking, can you do more? He is asking, can I trust you with more? Higher responsibility demands a higher standard. What you could get away with before, you cannot get away with anymore. The margin for error becomes smaller, not because God is trying to restrict you, but because influence amplifies everything. Your words carry more weight. Your actions set examples. Your choices create patterns that others follow. That is why discipline becomes non-negotiable at higher levels. You cannot live casually and lead effectively at the same time. Many people misunderstand pressure at the next level and assume it means they are doing something wrong. In reality, pressure is often confirmation that you are carrying something valuable. The more responsibility you carry, the more pressure you feel. Not because you are weak, but because what you are holding matters. God never places something insignificant on someone significant. The pressure you feel is proportional to the purpose you carry. Responsibility also reveals priorities. At higher levels, you cannot afford to waste time, energy, or focus. Distractions that once seemed harmless become costly. Relationships that once felt neutral may now become draining. You begin to realize that everything in your life must be aligned with the assignment. This is where difficult decisions appear, not because God wants to take joy from you, but because He wants to protect what He is building through you. Saying no becomes just as important as saying yes. Elevation also exposes motives. When responsibility increases, your reasons are tested. Are you doing this for recognition or for impact, for applause or for obedience? At higher levels, motives matter more than methods. You can have the right strategy and still fail if your heart is misaligned. That is why God often deals with the inner life before expanding the outer life. He prepares the vessel before he pours in more. Some people resist higher responsibility because they confuse it with burden. But responsibility is not punishment, it is proof of trust. God does not load weight onto people he does not believe in. If he is increasing what you are responsible for, it is because he sees capacity in you that you may not yet recognize in yourself. Responsibility stretches you, but it also strengthens you. It forces you to grow into the level you have been called to. At the next level, excuses stop working. Blame loses its power. Victimhood cannot survive where responsibility is required. You begin to understand that growth is not about having fewer problems, but about having greater ownership. Ownership is what separates those who rise temporarily from those who remain effective long term. God is not looking for people who can handle success for a season. He is looking for people who can steward it for a lifetime. So if you sense that life is asking more of you, that expectations are rising, that the weight feels heavier than before, do not assume you are failing. It may be that you are being elevated. Higher levels always feel heavier before they feel rewarding. But those who embrace responsibility do not just rise, they remain. And in God's system, staying at the top is far more powerful than simply getting there. Fear is one of the most effective tools the enemy uses to delay obedience. It rarely shows up as something obvious or dramatic. Most of the time, fear sounds reasonable. It whispers questions that seem intelligent. What if this doesn't work? What if you fail? What will people think? What if you lose what you already have? Fear doesn't always tell you to stop. Sometimes it simply tells you to wait, and that is what makes it dangerous. Delayed obedience often feels responsible, but in reality, it is still disobedience. When God speaks, clarity usually comes before confidence. But fear reverses that order. Fear demands confidence before action, certainty before movement, guarantees before faith. Yet faith has never required guarantees. It requires trust. Obedience is acting on what God has said, not on how safe you feel. Feelings are unstable, but obedience is anchored in truth. The moment you allow fear to be your decision maker, you give it authority it was never meant to have. Fear distorts perception. It magnifies risk and minimizes promise. It makes the future look dangerous and the past look comfortable, even when the past was unfulfilling. That is why fear often pulls people backward instead of forward. It convinces them that staying stuck is safer than stepping out. But fear is a liar. It promises protection and delivers paralysis. It does not keep you safe, it keeps you small. One of fear's greatest strategies is intimidation through imagination. It shows you worst-case scenarios that have not happened and may never happen. It turns possibilities into probabilities and then treats them as facts. Meanwhile, it hides the potential of obedience, the growth, the favor, the transformation that comes on the other side of trust. Fear never paints the full picture. It only shows you what you might lose, never what you might become. Obedience requires courage, but courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is the decision to move despite it. Fear does not disappear when you obey. It loses its power. The first step of obedience is often the hardest because it breaks fear's authority. Once you move, momentum begins. And momentum is one of God's greatest accelerators. What felt impossible before obedience often becomes manageable after obedience. Fear also thrives in isolation. The more you stay silent about what God has placed in your heart, the louder fear becomes. But when you step into obedience, clarity increases, direction sharpens, provision follows. Fear wants you to believe that you need to figure everything out before you move, but God's pattern is the opposite. You move, and then He reveals the next step. Light is given for the path, not for the entire journey. Many people pray for God to remove fear, but God often asks them to act in spite of it. Fear is not removed by prayer alone. It is weakened by practice. Every act of obedience builds spiritual muscle. Every step taken in faith increases confidence, not in yourself, but in God's faithfulness. Over time, fear no longer controls your decisions. It becomes a signal that you are stepping into something significant. The tragedy is not that people feel fear, everyone does. The tragedy is when fear becomes the final authority. When fear decides, potential stays locked, purpose remains dormant, calling goes unanswered, God's voice gets quieter, not because He stops speaking, but because fear keeps talking over Him. Obedience requires listening to the right voice, even when other voices are louder. So if you are standing at the edge of a decision and fear is shouting, do not assume that means you are wrong. Often it means you are close. Fear always shows up at the door of destiny. The question is not whether fear is present, but whether it is in control. When obedience speaks louder than fear, movement begins. And when movement begins, fear loses its grip. You were not chosen by accident. Your life is not the result of random events, lucky breaks, or coincidence. There is intention behind your existence, purpose behind your placement, and design behind your journey. Many people struggle not because they lack ability, but because they live as if they are optional. But when God calls someone, he does not browse, he selects. And selection means there is something specific assigned to you that cannot be fulfilled by someone else in the same way. Being chosen does not mean being better than others. It means being responsible for something others are not assigned to carry. That is why comparison is so dangerous. The moment you compare your journey to someone else's, you start questioning your own calling. Comparison makes you doubt timing, direction, and worth. It convinces you that because your path looks different, it must be wrong. But difference is not deficiency, it is distinction. God never duplicates purpose, he custom designs it. Chosen people often feel out of place. They don't fully fit into the systems around them. They sense that they were made for more, yet they cannot always explain what that more is. This inner tension is not confusion. It is confirmation. It is the evidence of an assignment that has not yet fully manifested. When you are chosen, normal environments eventually feel too small, and ordinary conversations begin to feel shallow. Not because you are superior, but because your spirit is being prepared for something greater. One of the hardest parts of being chosen is invisibility. Before public impact comes private development. God often hides the chosen in seasons where they feel overlooked, underused, or underestimated. This is not neglect, it is protection. If God revealed everything he plans to do through you too early, you would either become proud or be attacked before you are ready. Hidden seasons build depth, humility, and resilience, qualities that visibility demands. Comparison will always try to steal your confidence during these hidden seasons. You see others moving faster, being recognized sooner, achieving what you thought you would achieve by now, and the temptation is to rush, to copy, to force doors open. But what is chosen does not need to be forced. When the time is right, selection speaks for itself. God opens doors that no imitation can access. Being chosen also means being misunderstood. People often judge you based on your current position, not your future assignment. They may label you lazy, unrealistic, or unfocused because they cannot see what God has shown you, but approval is not required for purpose to function. God never asked people to agree with your calling. He asked you to obey it. Validation from the crowd is never a prerequisite for impact. Another weight of being chosen is responsibility for growth. Selection does not eliminate the need for discipline. It increases it. Potential without preparation becomes frustration. God chooses, but you steward. You are responsible for developing what has been placed inside you. Prayer aligns you, but practice sharpens you. Faith positions you, but consistency sustains you. Being chosen is not about entitlement. It is about stewardship. There will be moments when you doubt whether you were really chosen. Seasons of delay, opposition, or failure can make you question everything. But selection is not proven by ease. It is proven by endurance. The fact that you are still standing, still believing, still moving forward despite resistance is evidence that God's hand is on your life. Chosen people are not exempt from struggle. They are strengthened through it. So stop treating your life like a backup plan. Stop minimizing what God has entrusted to you. You are not here to fill space. You are here to fulfill an assignment. And when you understand that you are chosen, comparison loses its power, insecurity loses its voice, and obedience becomes your focus. You don't need to compete, rush, or imitate. You simply need to walk in what was selected for you because what God chose you for, no one else can replace. When God calls you higher, separation is not optional, it is necessary. Every new level requires a new environment, and every new environment demands distance from something familiar. This is why elevation often begins with loss. Not because God enjoys taking things away, but because certain attachments cannot travel where you are going. Separation is not rejection, it is preparation. What feels like being left behind is often God clearing space for what is ahead. One of the most painful aspects of separation is relational. People who once understood you may no longer relate to you. Conversations that once energized you begin to drain you. Places that once felt like home start to feel restrictive. This shift is confusing because nothing appears wrong on the surface, yet something feels deeply misaligned. That discomfort is not ingratitude, it is discernment. God is adjusting your appetite so you don't settle for what no longer feeds your purpose. Separation often produces loneliness, and loneliness is one of the most misunderstood seasons in spiritual growth. Many assume loneliness means something is broken, when in reality it often means something is being built. In isolation, distractions lose their power. Noise fades, clarity increases. God speaks most clearly when there are fewer voices competing for your attention. Preparation requires focus, and focus requires distance. During seasons of separation, God works on identity. When familiar affirmations disappear, you are forced to discover who you are without applause, approval, or constant reassurance. This is where dependency shifts from people to purpose, from validation to obedience. If your confidence is tied to external support, separation will feel devastating. But if your confidence is rooted in calling, separation will feel refining. Many people sabotage separation by trying to carry everyone with them. They feel guilty for growing. They shrink their vision to preserve relationships. But growth always creates distance, and refusing that distance leads to frustration. Not everyone is assigned to every season of your life. Some people are companions, not destinations. Letting go is not betrayal, it is alignment. Separation also reveals who is truly aligned with your future. When you stop chasing, pleasing, and explaining, those meant to walk with you will adjust. Those who are not will resist. This clarity is painful, but it is necessary. God removes certain influences not because they are bad people, but because they are no longer the right people for where you are going. There is also separation from old versions of yourself. Old habits, old mindsets, old coping mechanisms begin to feel uncomfortable. What once felt normal now feels limiting. This internal separation is just as important as the external one. You cannot step into a higher identity while clinging to a lower self-image. Growth requires mourning who you were so you can fully embrace who you are becoming. Separation is a season, not a sentence. It has an expiration date, but its work must be completed before the next phase begins. If you rush out of isolation prematurely, you carry unresolved patterns into new opportunities. God isolates to insulate, to protect you from pressure before you are ready to handle it publicly. So if you feel alone, misunderstood, or disconnected, don't assume you are abandoned. You may be in training. The silence, the distance, the pruning, they are shaping you for something that requires strength, clarity, and depth. Separation is not the end of community. It is the foundation for healthier alignment at the next level. What feels like loss now will soon make sense as preparation. Before your life can go higher, your mind has to go there first. Elevation never begins with circumstances. It begins with thinking. Many people ask God to change their situation while holding on to the same mindset that created it. But God does not upgrade environments without first transforming perspective. If your thinking remains at one level, your life will always find a way to return there, no matter how many opportunities you receive. Your mind is the control center of your destiny. What you consistently think determines what you consistently choose, and what you consistently choose shapes what you eventually experience. That is why transformation is always internal before it is external. A new level requires new thoughts, new standards, and new expectations. You cannot think like who you were and live like who you are becoming at the same time. One of them has to change. Higher thinking demands responsibility. At lower levels, blaming feels normal. At higher levels, ownership becomes essential. You stop asking, why is this happening to me? And start asking, what is this trying to develop in me? That shift alone separates those who grow from those who remain stuck. A higher mind does not deny challenges, it interprets them differently. Problems become training, not punishment. Many people block their own elevation because their mindset is still tied to limitation. They expect struggle because it is familiar. They anticipate loss because it is predictable. Even when God presents opportunity, their thinking quietly disqualifies them. They say things like, people like me don't do that. Or, that's not realistic for someone from my background. But purpose is not limited by history. It is activated by belief. God cannot take you beyond what you are willing to believe is possible. A higher mindset also changes how you view time. At lower levels, time is spent. At higher levels, time is invested. You become more intentional with your focus, your habits, and your energy. You realize that distraction is not harmless. It is expensive. What you allow into your mind consistently will either prepare you for the next level or keep you attached to the current one. Raising your mindset often feels uncomfortable because it exposes gaps. You become aware of habits that no longer serve you, conversations that drain you, and thought patterns that limit you. This awareness can feel discouraging at first, but it is actually evidence of growth. You cannot outgrow what you refuse to confront. God reveals these gaps not to shame you, but to mature you. A higher mind is also a disciplined mind. Motivation may start the journey, but discipline sustains it. You begin to do what needs to be done even when you don't feel like it. You stop waiting for perfect conditions and start acting on clear direction. This discipline is not legalism, it is alignment. It positions you to steward greater responsibility with consistency and integrity. One of the clearest signs that your mind is rising is that excuses begin to lose their power. You become less interested in explanations and more committed to solutions. You stop outsourcing responsibility for your growth and take ownership of it. This is not self-reliance, it is stewardship. You recognize that God provides opportunity, but you are responsible for preparation. So if you desire a higher life, start by building a higher mind. Guard what you consume, challenge how you think, elevate what you expect. Before God changes what is around you, He will always change what is within you, because once your mind goes higher, your life has no choice but to follow. Obedience is the key that unlocks acceleration. Many people believe growth is slow because God is delaying them, when in reality, they are delaying themselves through partial obedience. They hear the instruction, but they adjust it. They feel the conviction, but they negotiate it. Partial obedience may feel safer, but it always produces partial results. God's promises move at the speed of your obedience. Delayed obedience creates drag. It keeps you stuck in preparation mode while opportunity passes by. You keep revisiting the same lessons, facing the same tests, and praying the same prayers, not because God is withholding progress, but because the requirement has not been met. Obedience is not about perfection, it is about alignment. When alignment is complete, movement becomes rapid. Acceleration does not mean ease, it means efficiency. When you are obedient, things begin to line up that you could not have forced. Resources appear at the right time. People show up with the right skills. Opportunities open without excessive effort. This is not coincidence, it is cooperation. Obedience positions you where divine assistance can meet human action. Many people want clarity before obedience, but clarity often follows obedience. God rarely reveals the full picture up front. He gives just enough direction to require trust. The next step becomes clear only after the current step is taken. That is why obedience feels risky. It requires action with limited information. But faith grows not from knowing everything, but from trusting someone. Partial obedience is often disguised as wisdom. You tell yourself you are being cautious, patient, or strategic, when in reality you are avoiding discomfort. But obedience is rarely comfortable. It challenges your pride, your fear, and your desire for control. Full obedience requires surrender, and surrender always precedes speed. When obedience is complete, resistance loses strength. Doors that once felt heavy begin to open with less effort. What used to take months begins to take weeks. What used to take years begins to take seasons. Acceleration is not about rushing, it is about removing friction. Obedience removes friction by bringing your will into agreement with God's direction. Obedience also sharpens discernment. The more you obey, the clearer God's voice becomes. Confusion decreases because you are no longer debating whether to act, you are simply responding. This responsiveness creates momentum, and momentum creates confidence. Not confidence in yourself, but confidence in God's faithfulness. One of the reasons obedience brings acceleration is because it signals readiness. God entrusts more to those who respond quickly. Speed in obedience demonstrates trust, humility, and availability. It tells God you value direction more than comfort and purpose more than preference. That posture attracts increase. Acceleration without obedience leads to collapse. Speed without alignment creates burnout. That is why God prioritizes obedience over ambition. Ambition pushes ahead. Obedience moves in step. When you move in step, you may not feel fast, but you will be precise, and precision always leads to progress. So if you feel stuck, ask yourself not what you are waiting on, but what you have been instructed to do that you have not yet completed. The moment obedience becomes full, acceleration becomes natural. God does not withhold speed. He releases it where obedience is complete. 2026 is not a year you can afford to drift through. It is a decision year. Neutrality will not be an option. This is the kind of season where staying the same becomes a decision in itself. You will either rise intentionally or repeat unconsciously. There is no middle ground because momentum is already moving, and whatever you do not choose deliberately will be chosen for you by default. Every decision you make in a defining year carries more weight than usual. Small choices compound faster. Habits solidify quickly. Direction becomes harder to change once it is set. That is why indecision is so costly right now. Waiting feels safe, but waiting without direction slowly locks you into cycles you said you wanted to escape. What you tolerate in a decision year becomes what you normalize. 2026 will expose patterns. What you have been avoiding will demand attention. What you have been postponing will resurface with urgency. This is not pressure to overwhelm you, it is clarity to confront you. God uses decision years to bring alignment. He forces contrast so you can no longer pretend both paths lead to the same destination. Comfort and calling will no longer coexist peacefully. You will have to choose. Repetition is subtle. It does not announce itself as failure. It simply replays familiar scenes with slightly different details. Same frustrations, same excuses, same prayers. A decision year interrupts that cycle by asking a direct question. Are you willing to do something different, or do you prefer what is familiar? Growth is not blocked by lack of information. It is blocked by unwillingness to decide. Choosing to rise will require courage because it will cost you something. Time, comfort, relationships, habits, and old identities will all be tested. But choosing not to rise will also cost you, just more slowly. Regret is often the price of avoided decisions. What you delay today becomes what you mourn tomorrow. A decision year sharpens focus. You begin to see clearly what matters and what doesn't. You become less tolerant of distractions and more aware of alignment. This is where maturity shows up, not in emotion, but in execution. You stop talking about what you will do one day and start acting on what needs to be done now. Direction becomes more important than motivation. God does not force decisions, but He creates moments where avoiding them becomes uncomfortable. That discomfort is an invitation, not a threat. It is meant to wake you up to the reality that time is moving whether you move with it or not. Faith in a decision year is not about feeling ready. It is about choosing to move despite uncertainty. Some people will look back on 2026 as the year everything changed. Others will look back and wonder why nothing did. The difference will not be opportunity. Opportunity will be present for many. The difference will be decision. Those who chose alignment over ease will see transformation. Those who chose familiarity over growth will see repetition. So treat this year with respect. Don't waste it on hesitation. Don't spend it negotiating with fear or waiting for perfect conditions. Decide to rise. Decide to move. Decide to break patterns instead of repeating them. Because 2026 will not simply pass. It will respond to what you choose.